Hey, you're watching The Intersection where faith, life, and culture meet. I'm Eric Targe.
And I'm Justin May. And joining us today, very special guest. You know him, you love him, our very own Pastor Larry McCarthy, everybody.
Gentlemen, thank you. I'm really glad to be here, and I like the vlog format. You talk about some really relevant stuff, and so it's an honor to be here.
And today, talking about relevancy, I feel like you are the exact relevant person to talk to on our topic. Being that you're the pastor of Compassion Ministries, you've had so many strategic partnerships with the police department here in Chicago. You've had interactions with Pacific Garden Mission and other homeless shelters. We're continuing our series called Life and Breath, discussing ministry and advocacy for humanity at the margins. And today, we're talking about homelessness.
Yeah.
And I know it's a big topic. Like you and I the three of us have definitely talked about it, but you and I had a good conversation about a month back. And I think a good foundational question here that I hope you can answer. What actually is homelessness when we're talking about homelessness?
You know, it used to be this umbrella term that simply applied to anybody who was out on the street. But people now fall into some really definable categories. So if we talk about houselessness, I don't own property, I don't own a house, but people who live under the viaducts and tents, they're calling that home. They wouldn't necessarily consider themselves homeless, they would be houseless. So you have houselessness, we have homelessness, and then we have unsheltered. And probably the people who are at the most risk are the unsheltered. These are the people who are living in subhuman conditions that really aren't fit for human habitation. They're in abandoned buildings. They're under viaducts or bridges with no shelter, really. They're cardboard. These are the people that will be sleeping in hallways and stairwells. And as we are approaching the winter months, these are the people who are going to be more at risk.
What's that term again?
Unsheltered.
So the unsheltered.
The
so
unsheltered.
From homeless to houseless to the unsheltered.
To the unsheltered. And so people fit into those kind of three broad categories. And of course, there's subgroups for each of them. The people who are unsheltered are at particular risk now, because an interesting statistic that I just recently read, they tend to age more rapidly than people who have either a home or are in some type of sheltered environment, and that difference is 15 to 20 years.
Whoa.
So
really?
If somebody's 40 years old, they have the physical characteristics of somebody and the maladies of somebody who's in their 60s.
Yeah,
and so that puts them more at risk, obvious for a lot of things, but in the COVID environment, it certainly puts them more at risk because their immune system now is really compromised, and so they become weaker and weaker. This is a crisis of massive proportions that keeps kind of rippling out. I want to share this with you because the top 10 cities in the United States that are considered now to be at critical mass, where people are at risk for losing their homes, these are where we have serious delinquencies. Most of these are FHA, and so that would mean that these were lower income, typically minorities. But those that are now in serious delinquency facing imminent foreclosure. Number 1, Atlanta. Number 2, Houston, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Dallas, Riverside, California, Baltimore, San Antonio, Orlando, and Tampa.
We're number 3.
We are number 3.
Wow.
Yeah, and we're talking upwards of 400,000 people that are going to lose their homes. Where are they going to go? And so these are people who had shelter, who had a home, and certainly weren't houseless, but now they're going to find themselves literally with no place to go. And therein lies the rub. Permanent shelters have increased by almost 37% in the United States, and that's a good statistic. but it isn't near enough. But on the other end of the scale, and I can't necessarily explain it, the transient housing and emergency type shelters have decreased. Part of that's been a funding issue.
Can you talk just for a second, because I know that so those were new terms to me the first time I heard you use them. Can you talk just real briefly on what is a permanent shelter? What's a transient shelter?
Sure.
Who goes to those?
So a permanent shelter is where you're going to be there longer than one night. That's a good definition.
Okay.
Typically, it's a place where someone would go and they would kind of get anchored. Pacific Garden Mission has, as part of its component, because they have both, they have the transient and they have a permanent, you're in a program for at least a year. Okay. And so as a part of that program, they have, one of the good things about the Pacific Garden Mission, they have a Bible program. So you get a Bible certificate when you complete their program, but they also work with some getting you back on the grid kind of things. So if you don't have a state ID, you're going to get one by the time that you matriculate through their program. If there are healthcare needs, eyes, teeth, they're going to help address those things. And they transition you to employment. So when you leave that one-year program, you have a job, and then that next step is now I need to rent an apartment or go into a housing situation with other people. So that's a permanent situation. You can accept mail there. You can take mail there. It becomes an address for you. In a transient kind of situation, that's emergency. It's 10 degrees outside. I'm a freezer deaf. I don't get in. I'm in here just to warm up. When the sun comes up, I gotta go. It's not an address for me. You know, there may not even be a meal involved. It is literally a shelter opportunity. Large cities like Chicago will create warming centers. That's probably the best way to think about it.
Okay.
They're cots that are placed in a building, and it's basically come on in and sit down. As long as you don't cause any trouble, you can stay here overnight. Maybe you can get a cup of coffee, but once the sun is up, everybody has to get out. So those types of things are decreasing. Part of it, I think, is funding. Funding has evaporated. The other part is just availability of space and volunteers to man them, but that's the place where we find the biggest need right now, and there's going to be more and more of that coming forward.
Well, we're recording this in like mid-October.
Yes.
So like we all know, winter is coming. That's a really scary thing under normal circumstances, but given the stats that you just said, like, okay, we're looking at kind of unprecedented increases of people who are going to be needing those temporary things over and above what they normally are, like, that's a little bit scary.
Yeah. So Larry, as we think about that, what should we do? What should Christians do? I mean, we see clearly in Scripture, right, that God cares for the homeless. He cares for the poor, for those who are downtrodden. I mean, that's one of the big reasons that Israel was put into exile, because they ignored those who were poor among them, especially the foreigners, those who would have been labeled in that community the minorities in the community, or those who were disenfranchised by a variety of settings. And I think one of the things that you've got at is kind of how this isn't just like, oh, this person's just homeless. There's a systemic issue there where you're not only getting homelessness, but now you have healthcare issues because of that aging and the drain and the pressure that puts on the healthcare system. It's like if you care about your taxes, if you care about all these things, you should care about homelessness, because if we're not addressing homelessness, it's actually causing so many other issues in other places.
Yeah.
But what should we do?
So there are a couple of things just to keep in mind, the backdrop against it. So who are these people? The biggest category are individuals, not families.
Okay.
So people who are by themselves, that's the point.
Okay.
They don't have a support group, they don't have family, there isn't anybody, it's just them. That's your largest category of unsheltered. Within the unsheltered, that subgroup are men. And then within the subgroup, under the subgroup, are unattended teenagers. Now, one of the most startling statistics that I saw, and this has been a couple of years ago, that almost 12% of the high school teenagers in Chicago were considered homeless.
12%?
12%.
You're saying 1 in 10, more than 1 in 10.
Yes.
That is nuts.
How does that make any sense? They don't know where they're going to spend the night. Now, whether that means they were
We're talking
living,
high school students.
yes, whether they
High
were
school age.
whether they were going to live with grandma, but now they got to go to sisters, or they have to go to uncles, and whether it's this kind of shuttling around,
Yeah.
we don't know. But does that mean that they're unsheltered and they don't really know where they're going to go? They were just categorized as homeless. Very startling statistic. So,
What's the effect on that? So like recognizing, I imagine there's like 1,000 effects, but like you're the one who's done the research. You're talking to all of these different groups as our local outreach and compassion pastor. What are some of the big effects you've seen? And
50% of high school black African Americans don't graduate from high school in Chicago. 50%.
50.
Yes. 50% do not get a high school diploma. So it creates legions of people who are unemployed and unemployable. Even if tech companies came to Chicago in droves and created jobs, there wouldn't be any jobs for them. So the effect of that is that one, it's a big drain on resources. Two, there's no employment. And people aren't going to just sit on the side of the street and starve. They're going to do something. And unfortunately, that something oftentimes leads to things that we would call criminal activity, whether it's selling drugs or stealing things or whatever it is that they need to do. You asked a big question, and so I'm going to give you a big answer. What can we do? I think we have to look big, and a lot of churches have wonderful facilities. Are they willing to open their facility up for emergency basis for emergency warming centers? That isn't a long-term thing, because we can forecast the temperature. They'll tell you it's going to be cold tomorrow, right? Or it's going to be 20 below, or we've got a frostbite thing warning. Okay, when those things occur, are there churches that can say, listen, we can't keep you here but for the night, but for tonight, you can come in here and get warm?
Yeah.
There are a lot of issues associated with that, because some people have mental health problems, and some people want to fight, and some people are disorderly, and some people are smelly, and there are a lot of issues that go along with that. But the other end of the scale is that people will die this winter because they're unsheltered and they have no place to go. So the big vision would be, okay, fine, if we had to open a garage, open an auditorium, open a building, and say, come in here, sit down. You don't have to be in the elements tonight. Can churches do that? In any shelter or mission that you're aware of, they need everything now. They need everything. You know how hard it is for us to find toilet paper, paper towels, Lysol spray. I'm still looking for Lysol. If anybody's got any, would you call it? Anyway. Well,
call the number at the bottom of your screen.
Right, we need stuff, right? So imagine shelters. They need everything now. Soap, toothpaste, toothbrushes, towel, anything. And so you're never going to go to a mission and pull up and go, hey, I've got some paper towels. I got some toilet paper. Nah, we got plenty of that stuff. We don't need it, right? Anything that deals with hygiene, certainly sanitize. They can use that, and they can always use money, always use funds. Door of Hope was a small mission here in Chicago, only for men. It was a permanent shelter for men, and they only could take about 22 guys. But they kept them long term and really worked with these guys in an intimate way. They had a fire, it's burned. They got to rebuild. And so it just says 22 beds. 22 beds we don't have anymore. There's 22 beds that are gone. That's the Door of Hope on the near south side. So David Pendleton is their executive director. They have insurance. They're rebuilding. It's going to take some time, and no doubt they'll make it a little bigger, a little better than they were. But if you're looking for some place to help, Door of Hope would be a place that would certainly welcome some help, because they need everything. If you've got a few extra bucks, put a few blankets in your car, some gloves, hats. You're not going to have any trouble seeing people who are unsheltered. They're going to be right in front of our faces. And rather than $1 or $2, you can say, listen, I got some gloves. Would that help you today? I got a blanket. Would that help today? It's literally going to be down to that, I think. A lot of people got caught up in the mortgage problem because they took forbearances.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't forgive their debt. It just postponed it. And since their situation hasn't changed, in a lot of these instances, it really just exacerbated their debt. And you can't borrow your way out of debt. And so they started living on credit cards and borrowing it, and it's just dug them in deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And so
just hoping that something's going to turn around and get that magic big payday that can cover that. Yeah.
This is the canary in the mine kind of thing. If we track the foreclosures, it'll really give us a good barometer of where we're going with houselessness, with homelessness, and with regard to the unsheltered.
Larry, I'm just so thankful for the time that you've given us today, and my heart breaks as I think about that statistic once again, that 12%
Categorized as homeless.
12% of our youth, and I think just putting that in our minds can be just such a first step to interacting and caring for and advocating for those who are homeless, because it's easy to see someone in their 30s, 40s, and 50s and say, well, what did they do to get themselves here? And to recognize that statistic tells us that they were set up most of them were set up for failure when they were children.
Think about
fatherlessness,
that's right.
all of these different things. I didn't mean to cut you off. Please.
No,
What you're saying.
I was saying, but once you conceptualize the definition, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're under viaducts. It means there isn't a place they're calling home.
Yeah.
They don't have that stability that says, I'm going home. Where are you going to spend the night tonight? I don't know.
Yeah.
I might be sleeping over my friend's house.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I'm going to be. That instability is not fun.
It's the instability that puts you under a viaduct in 10 years.
And it mars personalities, and it causes all kinds of other problems. So.
Yeah.
That's also a good thing to think about in terms of like how we are interacting with others and interacting with kids. Like in my capacity working with high school kids, I have gotten to meet, a number of kids who are like, well, no, I'm not worried that they're living under a viaduct. But you think like, oh, okay, well, you said you were staying with your grandma, but now you spent the week over at your buddy's place, and you just get these little bitty glimmers. They're not walking around with a card saying, hey, I'm homeless.
That's right.
Hey, I've got this issue. There are these little context clues that, I know that I'm sure I've missed plenty of in conversations.
We hear about it all the time. It's just, okay. And sometimes it's easy to discount. Like, okay, a couple separate, so now I spent the weekend with my dad, or I spent the weekend with my mom, and now I'm going to go live with my aunt. We hear that, but there's a part of us that wants to say, okay, well, you got a place to live. You're okay. They don't have a home.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a home, and that's the difference. Some of the people who are out here in these tents, that's their home. That's what they call it. They're houseless, but this is home for me. This is my home.
Mm-hmm.
The people in permanent shelters, that's their address, right? This is where I live. It's we're in unprecedented territory in a lot of regards, because people who had jobs and were working, doing what they were supposed to do, now found kind of the bottom fell out of that. There are a lot of businesses that just aren't going to reopen. And those that do, it's going to be different. They won't utilize as many people as they had before. And so you're going to have a lot of people now jockeying for positions, looking for work. In the meantime, where do they go? We've skimmed the surface here. The geriatric imperative is a whole nother piece to this that we haven't talked about. There are more people over the age of 65 now than there ever have been in the history of the United States. That's good. People are living longer. But the quality of life.
Right.
It's a whole nother discussion regarding our seniors and this big umbrella. But for today, I think the charge would be listen, be sensitive, and everybody can do a little something. I mean, whether it's a glove or a hat or a coat or a blanket, going to the store, pick up some extra this, run it by a shelter. They will appreciate it.
Larry, again, I'm just so grateful for you and for the ministry that you do and for the context that you've made so that we can do this better, so that we can advocate, so that we can minister better. I'm sure you've learned a lot of what not to do. As we close our conversation today, which really could and should go on for another couple hours.
Yeah.
Larry, what would you tell people who are really wanting to help? Because I know that you've been a fan of this book, When Helping Hurts, and you've actually had committees that you've worked on. Read it. I know I've read it. I'm not sure if Justin, if you've read that book yet. When Helping Hurts. It's a great book. But what would you say from your personal experience and your knowledge of how people have helped in the wrong way? If you could give people one or two things that you'd say, don't do that, what would that be?
Well, that's a really broad category. So if we could squeeze it down to something we can digest, enabling is what we don't want to do, nor do we want to foster entitlement.
Yeah.
The idea with helping somebody is to literally think of a lifeboat that goes out and snatches somebody out of the water, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, they don't get in the lifeboat and go, oh, this is really nice, a few flowers, and I could decorate, and I could live here forever. That's not what this is for. We just got you out the water. Now we're going to help build some stability. So, and the reason I'm being cautious here, Eric, is simply this. I never want to suppress a generous impulse.
Yeah.
If you want to give somebody a couple of bucks, fine. Give them a couple of bucks. You want to buy them a sandwich? Fine. Buy them a sandwich. But that's a very thin veneer.
Yeah.
Often on things. So the things you have to be careful of, too, particularly in big cities like Chicago, is going the opposite end of the spectrum. Oh, this guy is homeless. Come on and stay with me. No, don't do that. Unfortunately, there are people who will not reciprocate from your generosity and, in fact, can visit some real cruelty on you and on your family. And so leave that to experts, so to speak, regarding people who may be outside. You don't want to start just taking people in. I even exercise caution with taking people to shelters. If you call the police, it may take some time now, but they will take people to a shelter. If you call them and say, we have a person here who is unsheltered, the weather is bad, they will take them. Now, that's not going to be real high on their priority list, because if shots fired, someone breaking in, burglary in progress, unsheltered person, it's just not going to hit the top of but they will take care of them. So if people are in earnest about how to help, certainly engage their local pastor. They can call us, they can call here, and if they have ideas or things that they want to do. For every good act, there's always something that you got to balance. You bring people into a facility, you got to deal with bed bugs. Yeah. If you're going to have food, you got to deal with vermin. Mice, ants, things. If you're going to warehouse coats, you got to have some kind of way to fumigate them and do that. So things have to be kind of thought through. And I think sometimes people have been frustrated because they've had really good ideas about doing things, and then some of these realities creep in. Yeah. So the idea is to get somebody on a footing where they become self-sustaining. There's no quick way to this. I'll just say this. When you're dealing with people, the biggest part of the challenge, Pastor Eric, I think, is identifying what's broken. Their relationship with God, their relationship with others, their relationship with their environment, their relationship with themselves. What's broken? And certainly we always want to lead them to Christ and give them that biblical perspective on things, because what's trapping you or keeping you? I've encountered people in the city of Chicago that are comfortable living in a tent outside. They don't want to go to a shelter. Yeah. They don't want an apartment. This is what they want. And there are people I know that they work jobs. This is just how they choose to live. We've had eccentric people always. I mean, there've been mountain men and people
hermits.
People who just live that way. But you have people now are being forced into the streets,
Yeah.
and that's a different situation. I guess, so I've come full circle. This is a complex issue that permeates every aspect. It has no respect of race or sex or IQ or geographical location, from Washington, D.C. to Riverside, California, and everything in between. And so it merits really a conversation, and it's a serious issue. It takes some serious people. So engage your people at your church to talk about it. So what is it that we can do in our neighborhood for the people who are unsheltered, for the people who are houseless, and for the people who are homeless? For the houseless, you can always buy a pastor a house. I just think that's always a good idea.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for tuning in to The Intersection. We're so glad that you joined us today. Would you do us a favor? If you enjoyed this on podcast or on YouTube, would you give us a like or subscribe? Would you give us a good review? Let us know what you think about the show. We're so grateful for you, Pastor Larry.
Thanks.
We're going to leave some suggested reading and other things in the in our little section underneath. What do you call it? The information section?
About the episode or something.
Yeah, about the episode section. Yeah.
And normally I like to cram a joke into the use of the comment section.
Is this what we're going to have now?
It
always happens.
It always happens, but no. I am actually going to say, if you have either good ideas.
There we go.
Or you know of, hey, this is a resource, this is a great ministry, wherever I am, you can leave that in the comment section.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's leave that in the comment section. For me, I buy gift cards. That's what I do. So like, typically Chick-fil-A, God's Chicken, right? So we get like Chick-fil-A gift cards, and we've given those out. And my wife and I have done that. We have those. Also, just because we don't carry cash in the city.
Who carries cash anymore?
I mean, I don't carry cash, just ever. Unless I'm in Chinatown now, because in Chinatown everything is done by cash. It's such an interesting thing.
Well, this is meandering, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I imagine that the music is going up, and
the music's going up,
and it's been done for a while now.
And so then I'm going to make some big wild arm gestures.
Yeah.